Can y'all hear me? Okay, it is 2:30. Thank you for joining us, the last session of the day. If you haven't, sign-in sheets at the front on your way out. Make sure you sign in, get your PDH credits. Great session here to close out the day with both Atlas and Cultural Resources. And with that, I'll hand it off to Lonnie Paul from Atlas, and Sean Doug speak, and then Matt Wilkerson and Mary Pope of Cultural Resources later.
Well, good afternoon. I'm glad y'all all joined us this afternoon. First things first, we have some survey cards. If you had not had a chance to fill out a survey card and drop it in our bucket, this is your last chance. So if you got one, if you want one, raise your hand and Sean will bring one to you real quick. Okay. We got to. And then when we finish our presentation, we'll actually we're going to have Matthew pull a name out of the bucket. So we'll get started here. So Morgan came up with this crash test dummy for moving NCDOT to the cloud, but that's what is very appropriate. We're going to go over just a little Atlas refresher. Most of you probably know about Atlas. I just want to cover that. Our new tool, the Atlas Map, is what we'll be introducing today. What the driving factors were behind that. We're going to do a walkthrough with some screenshots. We weren't brave enough to do it live, and we tested out the internet here, and we were glad we didn't do it live. And then some of our next steps coming up and how you can participate. So, if you didn't know how Atlas started, if you were involved with Kinston Bypass or some of the early modeling, wetland modeling that Morgan did, you know, that was one of those things we tried to use. We had LIDAR data that Matt Lawfer talked about earlier across the state, very unusual for most states. And he used that LIDAR data to produce the wetland modeling. Then that wetland modeling, we used it on a couple of pilot projects, Carthage and then Kinston. Carthage went away, as we know. Kinston got put on hold, but thanks to federal highway funding, we were able to continue the GIS pilot part of that project. Kinston was a perfect pilot project because it had multiple alternatives, long alternatives. And the amount of time and energy and resources it would have taken to do traditional field work for this, for environmental work, was enormous. And so we used GIS to do the evaluation, went all the way and selected LEDPA using GIS data. So if you're on that team and you push that forward, that was a great job. And then when that pilot came to fruition, the secretary said, hey, let's do this across the state. How can we expand the use of GIS and GIS data to streamline project delivery, to help make our jobs easier, to get these projects out the door quicker? And so that was the driving force behind Atlas. The problem we had, GIS data was not standardized across projects. It was not easily accessible. As you know, if we came and talked to your group, sometimes it was in a file cabinet. It might have been on a shared drive. Very likely it was not anything anybody could access. So that was one of the major problems is we collected a lot of data for projects. We just didn't handle that data after the project was done very well. No central repository for that spatial data. And you had to know at the time, you know, you got to know ArcPro now, haven't learned it yet. But you had to have specialized training and software on your computer to be able to use the GIS layers. And so Atlas was created to help address some of these shortcomings for us moving the department towards using GIS to help streamline project delivery. So the three tools, I'm sure you've used these. If not, let us know and we'll give you an introduction to them. The search tool is where you can go and get over 700 data layers. It pulls them all into one area. You don't have to go out and find them across all these different sources. You can download it within your study area. It packages it up nicely for you. The screening takes a subset of those layers, and you can look and see what's happening in your project study area very early in the process. We've heard several presentations today about finding out better information earlier in project development. That's what the screening will do for you. And it produces a report that you can then share among your project team. You can share it with your agencies that are reviewing things and have it as part of your project record. And then the workbench, it's actually where you're going to go and upload that project GIS data. So then there is a central repository so somebody else can use it. Like Kinston, the data that was collected for that actually helped advance like 4 or 5 other projects in that same region. And then you upload your project deliverables there. If you want it to be part of your project record and be searchable and findable and reportable, upload it through Atlas, and then you have that data governance on it that makes it easier to find in the future. You've seen that with your CE documents and the CE audit that Mike Sanderson asked you about. You upload it in that, he can run an easy report and get his FHAW audit done quickly. So what is Atlas? The GIS data is not just environmental data. It goes across all aspects of DOT work. Everything from wetlands and streams and natural and human environment to traffic, to right-of-way, utilities. It covers all parts of DOT. As you can see, here's some of the sources we incorporate. Some of it is DOT enterprise data, but not the majority of it. Most of it comes from other federal or state agencies or resource partners or municipalities or locally owned, like utility companies we're collecting now. And you can see here, you got City of Raleigh sewer areas, sanitary sewer areas. You've got some FEMA floodplain mapping we've got in there. We've got the road inundation data that Matt Lawfer talked about and resiliency earlier. And then endangered species modeling and habitat. So, how does it help contribute? Did we meet our goals? So it helps establish consistency across projects. You know, our project management is decentralized now. You have a lot more people doing project management along with the consultants. So at least you can use the same set of layers to do the same report and have that repeatable. That gives consistency for the agencies and then increases their confidence in the work we're doing. Streamlines the GIS data acquisition. You get it in one place. You can go back and find it later. It gives you access to the GIS data and tools, even if you're not a GIS expert. It helps you, it creates a process for adding that project-related data so that everybody else can use it and borrow from the information and the work you've already done, so that it reduces that redundancy. And then a one-stop shop for that project record. If you've been a new PM coming into a project and you try to collect all the data that have been done on that project, well, Atlas helps you do that now, provides that record. So I'm going to turn it over to Sean, and he is going to talk about the Atlas map and some of the driving forces behind our work on that.
Thank you. I have to say I love presenting with Lonnie. I always learn new things about Atlas that predates my joining the team. So, Atlas Map. As she said, I'm going to be talking about some of the drivers for Atlas Map. So, you know, there's a lot of strength in the tools. It's had a lot of it's had a lot of benefits, but with any tool, the first time you bring it out of the gate, right, there are always some issues. So, one of the drivers for Atlas Map, addressing performance lags. For those of you who have used it, you may have had times when stuff has been slow to load or your screening, you decided, I need to screen all 225 layers in the screening tool. And so it's slow to produce some of those reports. So that's one of the primary issues that is behind Atlas Map. So the solution for that, we're going to be moving Atlas to the cloud. That's going to be the first large state application that's going to be moved to the cloud. It's going to expand the capacity during high demand times. So once it's in the cloud, right, you're not restricted to how much server capacity do we have on-prem. Instead, if you have a greater need, you can bring more servers online. So that'll improve efficiency and efficiency and functionality. One of the other strengths is part of the reason the screening tool exists is because of the issue around capacity. And so by pushing it to the cloud and getting rid of that barrier, we're able to combine that search and screening into one tool. So not two maps, just one map. And we're also going to be able to increase the study area size, which is currently at 10 square mile limit. We're going to be bumping that up to 50 square miles. And in fact, I have a whole slide on it. Apologies, I didn't get a chance to run through this section. So yeah, so currently it's 10 square miles. And so it's not uncommon, especially with some of the larger DOT projects, to discover, like, I need to screen more than 10 square miles, right? And so what people talk about is, well, I have to do multiple screenings for my one project. This is super frustrating. So hopefully bumping that up to 50 square miles is going to make a huge difference. The other thing is, of course, you have something like small bridge projects. you've got multiple small bridges, and maybe you want to screen for all of those, but right now you're limited to one polygon. And again, with Atlas Map, bigger study areas and the ability to do multi-part screening. So you can drop a series of points. You can select a number of bridges and say, I want to screen for all of for all these different polygons that I've gone ahead and created. Another driver, can the map be bigger? So this is a picture of the search tool, and you notice there's a lot of white space, right? And people go, how about a bigger map? Fantastic, bigger map. 58% bigger by my calculation. All right, can the layer search be better? So in the current Atlas search, if you want to search for layers, you go over to a screen that hides the map from you, and you do your layer search. And then let's say you've got some hits here, and the screen here is too small. So even if you have hits, you have to open up the context menus to find out, well, where are those layers so that I can turn them on? So we're going to solve that problem as well. We've got the search happening now inside of the map. And in fact, as you're keying in words and it's finding layers that meet your search items, it's opening those up and showing you, oh, here's what you want to be able to add to your map. Another driver, limited search location options. So right now, you can only search by address. People obviously want to be able to search by TIP or bridge numbers. So with the new Atlas map, that click didn't work, we have now added project IDs, structure IDs, and there's the ability to expand that if there's a use case for it. So as Leilani mentioned, we would have loved to have done a demo, but we thought that just, I've never gone to a demo that's gone well. And then yesterday, on the guest Wi-Fi, we couldn't even get it to load. I don't know if anybody had a chance to stop by the booth, but we did have it loaded. And so, hopefully you got a chance to look at it. And if you didn't, and you filled out a raffle card, which is somewhere, and you're interested in doing some testing of Atlas Map, once we get a little further down the road, you'll be able to, be a beta tester. But let's walk through it. Okay, so this is the initial screen that you'll see when it first loads. Again, bigger map. So we've got some of the basic tools, right? Your zoom in, your zoom out. You can change the background. It's very similar to the existing tools, but I like the location better of those. Here are some other tools. We've got the measure, the draw, and the print. Those are very common, of course, to most web applications. All right, so moving into the tools that are specific to this application, the locate a feature or an area of interest. In this example, I'm just using Greenville. So you select it, it'll zoom you into that area. The next tool on the left-hand side is the layers. So again, as I mentioned, you can key in a term. It'll find the layers that meet your criteria. It'll show them to you. In addition to being able to turn them on here, you can also click off on the actual text, and it'll give you some of the metadata. So again, that metadata is available in the current search tool, but you're not looking at the map at the time that you're able to access that metadata. So we've combined those together, right? So you go, yeah, this is actually the layer that I want. Let's go ahead and add it into my map. Then once you've added those layers, you can flip over and see what the symbology is that's related to those layers. So let's see, can you actually see my mouse? No. So that's obviously in the table of contents. And one of the things that I didn't highlight as a driver for Atlas Map, but is actually a functionality that I really love, is in the current tool, you have to choose the identify tool to then be able to go in and click on a different feature and get the attribution that's associated with it. In Atlas Map, it's always on. Just go into the screen, click on a feature, it pulls up the attribution. From this screen, I also wanted to show you the ability to save templates. So I don't know how many of you use templates currently, but they're really nice because typically people want to look at similar layers sort of from project to project or day to day. So after you load those layers into your map, you can say, I'm going to save this as a template. It'll then say, okay, it's going to be your template. What do you want to name it? What's your description that you want to add to it? You go ahead, you save it, and then the next time you come into Atlas Map, you go back to that layers and make sure you're in templates, and then you can just go ahead and load your template. There are also DOT templates that are available, and those are, again, in the templates. This time you would select the DOT templates. It will bring up, as I brought up here, the merger pre-screening. You can select that, and it will add it. Apparently, I was in a hurry there. So it'll allow you to add that template. All right, the next button down is the study area. So study areas have two purposes. One is that if you got layers loaded, you can then say, here's my study area. I want to be able to download data for that specific study area because, of course, some people are still going to want to take stuff into a different application to be able to do different analysis, to do different maps. And so creating the study area is beneficial for that. You can also, Leilani mentioned reports that you can do. And so you would do those after you build your study area. So with the study areas, we have traditionally had the ability to draw, upload, and select a study area. We also now have bridges as an option. That was something that folks requested. And so what I've done here is I've got a couple of bridges, and I've added them into my study areas. And again, it's that multi-part study area. And so if you select a bridge, you can then click on this button here that I've identified, and it will add the study area, and it will say to you, how big of a buffer do you want around this particular item? And actually, one of the things I didn't realize was part of the functionality until I started playing with it is you can also select other things. You can select a school and say, hey, I want to add this to my study area. Let's create a buffer around it. So it really expands the functionality of the tool. The next item on that left-hand bar is running the screening. So it's going to confirm for you, here are the layers you've got loaded. Is this what you want to go ahead and screen for? The answer to that is yes. And then it'll run a screening report, and from that screening report window, you can then say, I want to download the screening report itself, but you can also, again, download that data. And so you can do it as a shapefile, you can do it as a file geodatabase, you can also do it as a DNG in case you want to move it over into a CAD format. And so these are just some of the examples of the types of reports that we have that are available. We've got the hydro report, we've got the sort of main screening report. We're also working on a threatened and endangered species screening report. So, Leilani, I actually think you're supposed to do next steps, right? Fantastic.
All right, so the next steps. We're going to be testing the new Atlas Map tool. The GIS IT team is testing it right now. Then we're going to have the Atlas business team, and then we want some users to join us. We have a super users group, but if you're interested in helping us test it, let us know. We won't be releasing this until IT gets all the infrastructure done for the cloud migration. If you got any specific questions about that, Eric Wilson's here. He can ask any technical details about cloud migration. I know what it does. I don't know how to do it. We're working on the ability to print common figures that are using documents. That was a request we got. Like, hey, I've created my map. Why can't I just print my figure? I put it in my CE document over and over. And then, like Sean just said, we're working on the threatened endangered species report also. So the tools are not just for NCDOT staff and consultants. We're actually trying to open up the access to the search and the screening tool. We're removing the AD requirement, and so like our municipal partners and utility partners can actually get access to those tools easier. It increases that proximity awareness to have other partners having that access. It helps reduce possibility of conflicts, relocations, and delays. Just came out of the permitting and utility discussion, and that's, early information, better information is what they're wanting. Increased cooperation between different agencies working on a project. And if you want to know how to access the tools and training, we have our website here, and we've been handing out our business cards with a QR code. It'll take you to our training site and also to our resource page. If you want to contact us, we have our atlas at ncdot.gov. If you want to be a part of our super users, part of our testing, or just have questions, let us know. And so that's our presentation today. Do we have any questions? No questions? Oh, yes. Andy?
You mentioned at the start of your presentation about the Atlas Workbench and a way of uploading deliverables. Can you distinguish that from the submittal tracker that we heard Helen Dixon talk about?
Yes, the submittal tracker is something project managers would use to go back and forth on drafts between them and their consultant doing the work, and it helps them track, when they submit it, when they get it back, what comments are made, those multiple revisions. When that process is done, and then you have your final approved document, whatever it is, that's when you would then upload it through Atlas, and it still gets stored in SharePoint. But when you load it through Atlas, you have the data governance on there. It has a standard naming convention and tagging. It goes into the same folder every time. And so then you can run a report on it and find those later a lot easier, like the CE audit that Federal Highway does. That's the main difference. Two different functions there. Yes?
You guys mentioned that there still needs to be some testing done, and then what's the timeline for something like that before it's like up and running?
Yes, we are almost finished with the development of the tool ourselves. We're going to be waiting on big DIT to get infrastructure for the cloud so we can actually release it. But between the time us finishing and actually that release, we're going to be doing some testing offline. And so, Slade, this summer, the rest, I don't know, Eric, we don't know exactly when DIT will be finished, but we plan on doing that testing this summer. So if you're interested, let us know. We hope to have all that user testing done when DIT finishes with the cloud migration, and then when we push it out, we'll be ready with everything.
Along the same lines of submittals, right now for like the express design traffic evaluations that we're doing, once those are finalized, we're uploading them onto the Scoping Connect. Do you think it would be good to upload those through the Atlas as well?
Absolutely. And we've been working with Derek Lewis's group to get all of that accessible by, both the pre-construction and the scoping firms with those permissions, and that should be an upload you'll have on there.
Okay.
Yes. Absolutely.
Do people have cards they've completed so they can enter the route?
Oh, yeah. Matt's going to pull the card out. Anybody else have a card they want to put in?
Yeah, I do have that.
The last minute? We don't want to leave anybody out. Do y'all have some?
Thank you. Thank you.
We're going to let Matt pull it, so if it's somebody we know, no funny business. We'll straight these out.
It's not me. I did write my name in there too.
But if you have any questions or want to be part of our user group, just contact us at atlas@ncdot.gov.
That's right, for enter a raffle card, because that's one of the questions.
All right, shake them up. Matt? Oh,
Yeah.
that's right. Okay. Pull one out. We'll see if they're here.
Okay. Ooh, I hope I get this name right. Rosse Abadila? Okay. Talking my fine. Russ.
Yay!
Sorry, Russ. Yeah.
Good.
so are you indeed using that microphone? Okay.
Sure.
Anyway.
Can be. Want me to get started?
Yes, go ahead.
All right.
I don't know how to click it
Is this one?
if I'm not there.
Oh. Okay.
Testing. Testing.
You want to?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll sit
Seriously.
here. I'll move over a chair, and that way we can
You do
swap
that.
back and forth
Okay.
here. Technical difficulties. All right. Good afternoon. Just one quick note, we have no prizes. So if you feel like you need to leave now, we understand. Not you, Eric. Actually, we are the Cultural Resource Program Overview team.
You might have to talk louder.
Is the mic working? Can you hear me now? Oh, okay. I'll just hold it close here. Yes, we are the Cultural Resources Program Overview team. My name is Matt Wilkerson. I'm the archaeology supervisor. And I've got 6 folks in my shop, and Mary Pope Furr is here. She is the Historic Architecture Group leader, and it's her and 3 other folks. And we handle the investigations on behalf of the department on a statewide level. So what do? The archaeology group, we go out and we look for prehistoric and historic sites. And as you can see from this slide, it's not always just terrestrial, it's not always just shovel tests or digging up holes in the ground. We actually have a variety of different resource types like rock shelters and underwater archaeology.
That's all?
That's it.
I always thought it was dinosaurs too. But
There are no dinosaurs, no.
just checking. I'm Mary Pope Furr with the Historic Architecture Group. Mine's pretty self-explanatory, although it does include some landscapes and some other esoteric things. This is a mill in Madison County. So we go out looking for old structures and old battlefields sometimes come to us and whatnot. We also deal with linear transportation features like old rail lines, even old highways come our way. And our job is to go ahead and identify those properties and determine whether or not they are eligible for the National Register of Historic Places.
Turn your microphone off.
Okay.
Here, let's turn on. If they have any feedback being so close.
Great.
Okay.
Lovely.
How about now? Is that better?
We have lots of feedback.
As long as there's no feedback between the two of
It's
them,
usually
we're good.
feedback from the public about what we do, but it's all good.
It's sometimes not so positive either. So as Mary Pope was talking about, we have 2 distinct disciplines, but there is some overlap on occasion for the resources that we look at. And we always work towards evaluating those resources for significance using National Register criteria if you've got a federal nexus for your project. And the big 4 questions or criteria that we use to assess whether a site is significant are on the screen. For archaeology, it usually revolves around whether the resource has the ability to give us important data on history or prehistory, but all 4 of these criteria or questions apply to each of the resources that we would examine as part of a federal aid or project with the federal nexus, which means usually property, funding, or permits. There are many other pertinent laws. Section 106 is the one that comes into play mostly for us, and again, that deals with this National Register criteria that you see at the top. We also have multiple state statutes that come into play, including those associated with cemeteries or National Register listed projects, or properties rather, for a state-funded project that has no federal nexus.
And I'd also like to interject one of the laws, which Matt doesn't have to deal with a lot, but I do, like historic district overlays, especially like in Raleigh or other big cities where you've got these overlay districts where it's not a national register, but there's a local historic preservation commission that can tell you what color to paint your house and what the sidewalk has to look like.
Right, and just for the record, archaeological sites in North Carolina, there are very few listed on the National Register. There are a lot more structures or other type of historic properties that are. And the reason for that is we're time and money to make that final assessment or to get that type of resource listed on the register.
So what we keep referring to, and I'm sure you hear a lot of, is the basic 106 process. Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, signed in 1966.
And essentially, it's a pretty easy process, but it seems to always complicate things. You establish an area of potential effects, which is called an APE. You evaluate properties within that APE to determine if they are either already listed on or eligible for the National Register of Historic Places, using the criteria that Matt showed you earlier. We then, if there are any eligible properties, assess the effects that the project will have on those properties. And we do that in consultation with state and federal agencies. And then we consult on mitigation for adverse effects with multiple parties. And then we complete the mitigation and project commitments. So, and what we've provided is a little link at the bottom about what the Advisory Council on Historic Places, which oversees the 106 process in DC, that's kind of a little link to what the basic 106 process is.
And go ahead.
It's my turn.
Okay. It's her turn. Go ahead.
Okay. What we have in this state, though, is a programmatic agreement, which is a really nice way to handle projects for the Department of Transportation. The parties here are listed. We've had this agreement in place since 2009. The parties have increased over time because I think they've been impressed by the results. But what it allows is that DOT staff has been given the authority to identify the need for surveys. Okay, that's really important. You don't have to go to the State Historic Preservation Office or the Office of State Archaeology with your project area and say, do we need to do anything? That actually comes to our offices, and our staff makes that call. We also get to determine eligibility, and we get to do a preliminary assessment of effects. Now, I mean, there is a caveat here. The HPO and OSA, they do have an opportunity to comment or object to what we're doing, but we have a really good relationship with them, and we have a long-standing relationship with them so that we kind of understand what their concerns are. This is for all state and federal transportation projects, although it does not apply to projects where FAA, FTA, FRA are in the lead, and it does not apply to locally managed projects. That's where FHWA is giving, an 80% match to a city or a municipality, and then the municipality is in charge of the environmental document. These PA forms that we provide are used as part of the environmental documents and as part of the permits.
All right, you ready for me now?
Your turn.
Okay. As part of the PA process, we do have a huge list of exempt activities, and there's a checklist that project managers can use to go through the parameters of their project to see if it meets the threshold to be considered exempt. And if it's considered exempt, you sign that form or that checklist and you keep it for your project records, and you do not actually have to coordinate or consult further for Section 106. State-funded projects are also subject to the process that we created for the PA, although they are not actually specifically allowed under the terms of the PA. All that means is we used to do both state and federal projects under a PA. We had to pull the state projects out, and we now have an MOU that covers how we will handle coordination for state-funded projects. And guess what? It's just like the PA process. We use the same forms, we use the same information to make the decisions, and we route that information back to the project managers for their records.
So like I said, we've had this programmatic agreement in place since 2009. We've done over 5,700 projects in review. Typically, in one review year, over 70% of the projects do not require in-depth surveys. That's pretty impressive that you send in a project and you've got a pretty good chance of having somebody come back and saying, no further work needed. Typically, we're going to get you those no survey recommendations within 30 days, which, again, we're going to say is usually faster than the State Historic Preservation Office. We have more people working on it than they do. And over these years, only 42 projects have resulted in adverse effects, so that's a pretty low percentage. Most of those are historic bridges. So we're pretty proud of this agreement. So when to request cultural resources assistance. If you're unsure if it's an exempt activity, there is a checklist that we have for you to look at if it is an exempt activity. If you're unsure about the activity or unsure about whether or not it applies, or you just don't feel right, go ahead and send it in, because we're happy to take a look at them. I will bring this up, even though I'm sure that I'm going to probably cringe for saying it. Everybody thinks that sidewalks should just be easy peasy, shouldn't have to worry about them. Let me tell you how a sidewalk can affect you and really take up a lot of your time. So, especially when you're dealing with local historic districts. If this is a PA project for you, it's not adding any additional steps. What it actually is taking away is that you're not going to be sending in scoping comments to the SHPO. And the reason why this is outlined is that every week, Matt and I get a comment from the SHPO saying, hey, have you guys seen this project? Because they sent it to us for scoping comments. Don't send them the scoping comments. Don't send them a request for that. We've already got it handled. Our goal is to get to these projects early, and so we say send us a request when you have enough information about the project. Charge numbers, definitely, because we're going to have to charge our time to something. And when you've got at least a good study area in mind. You may not have everything designed, but if you've got a good study area, we can go ahead and get started. And if you've got multiple projects, we encourage you to go ahead and submit multiple projects.
Right, and just one thing about if you're unclear of your project being a PA project or not, you can always call us. You can just email us. You can set up a discussion with us if you want to go over it before you make that call to submit it. Or you really can just go in if you've got all the project information and make that submittal. It's really your choice. So how do you do that? Well, you go to the eTracks website and you put your project information in, and you need to know what type of request are you making. Most of the ones that we get are the screening requests to make survey or no survey recommendations. And there are a variety of other request types that through the life of a project, mostly revolving around Section 106, may be something you need to request. For example, if you request a screening, you're going to need to request it from each discipline. We'll give you our recommendations, and if we say a survey is required, for example, for archaeology, you're going to need to go ahead and submit an actual survey request. And the reason for that is we know what you sent us, we're looking at it, we know that that area needs to be surveyed, but we may not be aware of the timing of your project. Perhaps it's you've got other alternatives that you're going to develop. So that's why we ask for that extra step after we tell you a survey is needed for you to make the determination of when you think you need to submit a actual survey request to our shops. The other different types of requests include things like MOAs. That's a memorandum of agreement. That's a binding legal document that comes into play later in a project if you had historic properties that were adversely affected by your undertaking. We do document reviews. We'll look at your CE, we'll look at your EA, we'll provide comments to make sure that it represents our disciplines correctly, and even permit reviews. A lot of projects now certainly have state funding, and we do a lot of CEs even for those, but the handful that are out there that are minimum criteria, if you still have a core permit, and that's the federal hook, so to speak, for 106, we'd be glad to take a look at that permit application to make sure you've got everything in there that you need to move forward.
I'd just like to add probably one of our, besides the cultural resources screening request, the other most common request is redo. So something about the project has changed. So that we get many of those. Those can be in the other category, or you can just request a new screening. But the project area has changed, or things like that happen. So that's where the redos come in.
And that gets back to what you asked us to look at initially. Bigger is better for our purposes for your study area. You can certainly wait until you whittle it down, and that may, that's one of those risk management scenarios where we may not recommend as much work, but it's way easier for us to make recommendations for a broader area, get that work done, and give you the results for you to select where to put your project instead of going back through the redo loop for adding portions to the study area that we didn't look for. So what do you need to do for our eTracks requests? The screen there is pretty descriptive. One of the key things we need is a working WBS. We have to charge our time to something, right? We all need to work towards that. Maps that you may have, if you've got any agency correspondence that might have already existed that you think will help us, you can attach that. You need a SharePoint site because we're parking everything at SharePoint, including maps that we generate, the forms that we generate, full technical reports that we create if that's what was required as a result of the review. Obviously, any memorandums of agreement will go there as well. And, the mapping that you provide to us, if you've got alternatives, we'll take them. If you've got shape files or DGN files, we'll take those. KMZ files. Anything that gives us a better understanding of what the limits of your project are, or if you've got the alternatives developed within a study area, we'd like to see those. And again, as Mary Pope mentioned, redo loops. If something changes, let us know. If we're still working toward completing your project for you and you've got those changes, we don't really need an additional request for that. But the ones where you need the additional request, if we've finished our forms, finished our recommendations, and then you add those alternatives. So don't be shy about saying, hey, we just increased the study area. I know we haven't heard back from you. I think you're getting ready to do your surveys, but here's some additional information. We'll take it at that time. The other key thing that we like to know is the document type. Anymore, we have so many state-funded projects that are actually doing CEs. That's a key distinction to make for us, because if you're doing a CE, that is a federal action, and even if it's a state-funded project, perhaps with no other federal tie-ins, we're going to treat that as a federal project, and we're going to go through the 106 steps, not just the general statutes for state projects.
So what do you get back from us? You get forms from us, and they are separate forms, and they look different. That was one of the refinements that we made from the early years. You need a form from each one of our groups in order to have compliance with Section 106 or GS 12112A for a state project. You're going to get back any number of these forms. A survey required, a no survey required. You could get back something that says no historic properties present. That means we didn't find anything out there. No historic properties affected. My staff will make a call like that because we know that you guys are just replacing a pipe somewhere. It's jurisdictional, but it's a small pipe. It's next to maybe a historic farm that's already listed on the National Register, but we don't really see how it's going to be impacting things. So we're going to make a no historic properties affected, and then you're done, which is kind of nice. Effects required. That can also be, doesn't require a survey, but we already know that you're in the middle of a historic district, and so let's just go straight to effects. And then an effects assessment. And that kind of gets into our next slide, which is about effects assessments. A key part of the 106 process is that if you do have eligible properties, then you have to meet with state and federal agencies along with other consulting parties to determine how the undertaking or the project alters the characteristics that make the property eligible for the National Register. So you're going to need to make sure that your property limits are outlined on design plans, and we're going to sit down and discuss those. I hold meetings once a month with state and federal agencies. I have a standing meeting with them. Sometimes Matt's projects come into those. Sometimes they don't. They just have general discussions. But these effects assessments are really important to your project and advancing your project. If you're in the realm of adverse effects, that has a big impact on which alternative you're going to be choosing. So really important to have these effects assessments done and done as soon as you have good information. So what does some of that information include? Effects consultations. Okay, it's not advancing here. Here we go. So they're made jointly by us and the lead federal agency. And what we're looking at are impacts that are physical, visual, auditory, vibrational sometimes. We need to know what kind of temporary construction easements you're going to have out there, what kind of utility easements you're going to have out there, right-of-way easements, drainage. Are you going to change the access to these properties? Matt's got a good case right now of an archaeological site where the access is going to be changed. And what kind of impact does that have on an archaeological site? Bicycle and pedestrian accommodations. Most of the time, the bane of my existence is somebody coming into a meeting and at the last minute going, yeah, but we're also going to add a multi-use path. That's a lot of square footage on a historic property. So that's really important. We want to know if you've got a bridge, what are your bridge rails? What are your what type of bridge rails are you going to use? What options of bridge rails do you have? What are the retaining walls going to look like? How tall are they going to be? Can we add aesthetic treatments to these things? Guardrails, traffic signals, where are you going to put the traffic cabinets? One of my biggest cases was the fact that they put I will not name what division it was, put a traffic cabinet right underneath an arch that had a sign on it that said this property is listed in the National Register of Historic Places. That did not go over well with the property owner, and it got moved at an extreme cost. So, these are things that we're asking. We want to know about landscape features and vegetation removal and, how you're going to slope the project and things like that. These are the things we're going to be asking you. And typically we're going to meet with you ahead of having a formal meeting with the state and federal agencies so that we're already asking you these questions because they know to ask these questions. So now we go ahead and ask these questions so that you already have the answers for them. It doesn't guarantee, though, that I'm going to ask all the questions that they ask. There's still some things that surprise me. And this is all Matt.
Well, before I get into that, just one thing about the effects. A lot of folks will ask us, why do we need two separate forms? Why do we need two separate processes, so to speak, for cultural resources? A few answers to that are they're unique resources. Archaeology is different than historic architecture. And that actually really feeds into the effects consultations. The area of potential effects for archaeological resources is generally the maximum area of ground disturbance activities associated with your project, including easements. Standing structures, they have to deal with what Mary Pope mentioned earlier, a lot of visual and other effects that generally don't apply to most of the archaeological sites that we have in North Carolina. That's not always true. We always look at everything, but our footprint for the area where we do our detailed investigations is generally smaller than the area of potential effects that gets established for historic architecture. So now on to everybody's favorite subject, tribal consultation. Several years ago, we found that the department probably wasn't doing the best job reaching out to the federally recognized tribes that have a vested interest in counties of North Carolina. So we partnered with our primary lead federal agencies, that's the Corps and FHWA, as well as the SHPO, to try to create some framework for providing information to tribes well ahead of the project construction timeline or the permit timeline. So we now have a pretty good process where we consult with 17 state and federally recognized tribes on behalf of the agencies, the lead federal agencies. The tribes that are federally recognized can always jump back in at any point and request government-to-government consultations with that lead federal agency. But this just helped us streamline when project information goes to the tribes. I'm sure a lot of project managers out there have seen that letter that you send to the tribes asking for that input. Sometimes you get a response back. A lot of times you don't. Even if you don't, that lack of response doesn't stop your project as long as you made that attempt to reach out to those tribes with information about your project, especially for Corps of Engineers permitted projects. And we don't often hear back on simple projects, but trust me, they're involved heavily on large-scale projects, especially in the western part of the state right now. A9 is one of those examples. We're bringing them to the table really helps both our State Historic Preservation Office and our Advisory Council of Historic Preservation reps in D.C. understand that we've done our due diligence to reach out to those tribes.
It's your favorite slide.
This is my favorite slide, yes. Questions or comments?
And complaints go to Jamie.
He's in the audience. Jamie, we're going to make you stand up if there are any complaints.
Any questions? Oh, Teresa. 65 and 70.
65 and 70 are the two general statutes that cover marked and unmarked burials in North Carolina. Again, that's North Carolina general statutes. Put my glasses on here for a second. So 65 is for cemeteries and who can take them out, who can disinter and reinter. 70 is for unmarked graves. That's where we bring in the Sheriff's Department or the Office of State Archaeology should we need to take them out in an archaeologically sensitive manner. If they're deemed to not have to come out in an archaeologically sensitive manner and they're part of a cemetery that's within DOT project right-of-way, and they're not considered a cultural resource that's significant, usually it's right-of-way that is the entity within NCDOT that makes sure those folks are disinterred and reinterred in a suitable location. I see you looking.
What makes one kind of remain special and another not? I mean, in my brain,
Right.
it's like, if they're both human, why is one special and one not?
Right. Well, the statutes make the distinction between a marked grave and an unmarked grave. If you've got a gravestone and you know who that individual is there, it's handled under that first statute. For things that we find, say Native American burials, they don't have grave markers. Slave interments, they don't have grave markers. So we try to go through a process to talk to both the local sheriff's department and the Office of State Archaeology and perhaps some of the federally recognized tribes or state recognized tribes to see who thinks they are the descendants of those particular individuals that we might find. And if we take them out archaeologically, we just excavate the entire grave shaft and remove all of the human remains, and we do some basic skeletal analysis, and then we have to make the decision of whether we put them back in the ground, whether we give them to a tribe or a community that has requested those remains, or whether they go to the Office of State Archaeology's Research Center. The last one we don't want to do. We don't like to put people in boxes and just store them at a research facility. We'd rather, do the right thing, but what we think is to put them back as close to where we found them as possible. Any other questions? Yes.
You mentioned about the scoping comments and not, requesting them from the Historic Preservation Office, but we just did one recently, and when you send it to the clearinghouse, they automatically send it to
I
them.
know.
So do you have
No.
any, or if they respond to it?
I don't know how to uncheck that box. We've tried. All we can do is maybe you put a note on it, that's very clear that says, in your scoping comments, this project is being processed under the PA, the NCDOT PA. So that way, when the clearinghouse inevitably sends their blanket statement out, that's kind of one of the first things that the State Historic Preservation Office Environmental Review Team sees, and then they don't text us.
And if they respond to us, they ask for a shapefile, should we just respond then and say that it's, under the programmatic agreement and not continue to information to them, or?
I don't care.
Usually they check with us, and then we
Yeah.
tell them that it's a PA project. So then you'll get an email back, hopefully from them, that says, "Hey, this is a PA project."
Yeah.
And the suggestion we had at one time was to include, like Mary Pope was saying, within the body of the letter, that this project is subject to the Section 106 PA, the 2020 PA. That way they would know that. It might not mean much to the other recipients of the scoping letter, but at least we wouldn't have to hear about it from the SHPO.
Most of the time, they're trying to figure out if it's a municipal project, since we don't handle municipal projects. So that's most of their questions revolve around that. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Again, all complaints go to Jamie. All right. We're good.
All right. Well, thank you, folks. Appreciate it.
Matt, Mary, thank you so much. Thank you all for attending. It's been a great session, and hope you have a great rest of the afternoon. Oh, and sign in up front if you didn't already.
I've got complaints.